I'm Lisa Shepard, and I am the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. The mission of the CJCP is to enhance professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students, a mission which it has been doing since 1998. One of the ways that the CJCP does this is to sponsor this historical video series, which is a collection of video interviews of distinguished lawyers, judges, and professionals from across North Carolina. The CJCP began filming these video interviews in 2000 as a means to preserve the thoughts of these bar leaders on the legal profession and on professionalism issues. All of the videos in this series are available to you on the CJCP website and the CJCP's dedicated YouTube channel. We are so fortunate to have had many distinguished members of the North Carolina Bar over the years, and they have much accumulated wisdom to share with us. It is important to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and doing it well requires not only substantive knowledge that one gains in law school and from studying for the bar exam, but also the value of experience learned from other lawyers. I hope that this video series will give you not only a fresh insight into the person being interviewed, but also some meaningful information about how to be a better lawyer in your own practice. Enjoy, and remember, esse quam videri. Strive to be professional in all that you do, rather than to merely seem so.
Tonight I'm privileged to present the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award, which, as you know, is the annual distinction for a member of our North Carolina legal community who has significantly demonstrated professionalism throughout his or her career. Many of you here tonight have been involved with the Commission on Professionalism and its many initiatives to enhance professionalism among North Carolina's judges, lawyers, law students, and other professional organizations. And I want to thank you, all of you, for your continued dedication to this cause. I am truly privileged to be able to honor a much beloved justice, lawyer, statesman, and friend, one who espouses and exemplifies the qualities and characteristics the Commission honors most. This year's recipient is Justice David M. Britt of Robertson and Wake counties. Justice Britt hails from a small community called McDonald, North Carolina, and he is, as all of you know, a prominent member of a large, close-knit, and well-known North Carolina family. He attended Wake Forest College from 1933 to 1935, and Wake Forest Law School from 1935 to 1937, including 2 summer sessions. He passed the bar exam at the age of 20 in August of 1937. And after being admitted to the bar in 1938, he started his own law practice in Fairmont, which is also where he began a very successful political career and active community life. His first position as an elected official was as solicitor of the Fairmont District Recorder's Court in 1940. In 1958, Justice Britt was elected to the North Carolina House of Representatives, where he quickly became a leader in many areas, particularly in the movement toward court system improvements, and he was a principal architect of the legal and judicial reform that followed. In addition to serving as Speaker of the House of Representatives, he served on numerous committees and commissions within the General Assembly, most notably the Courts Commission, which implemented the court improvements that gave us our unified court system, which is the envy throughout this country, our unified court system and our Court of Appeals. In 1967, Governor Moore appointed him as one of the 6 original judges of the newly created Court of Appeals. In 1978, Governor Hunt appointed him to the seat on the Supreme Court vacated by my father upon his retirement. Justice Britt then served 4 years on the High Court. Since his retirement from the court, he has served as an emergency judge and as counsel with the Raleigh law firm of Bailey and Dixon. Justice Britt has served in numerous community leadership positions. He has served within his church, with the Fairmont Board of Education, with Rotary International, as Robeson County Democratic Chairman, on the State Democratic Executive Committee, as Vice President and Trustee of the State Baptist Convention, and as Trustee of Wake Forest University, Southeastern Baptist Seminary, and Meredith College. He has been awarded the Honorary Doctor of Laws degree from both the Wake Forest University School of Law and the Norman A. Wiggins School of Law at Campbell University. As a lawyer, judge, statesman, and family man, Justice Britt is primarily known for his honesty, his straightforwardness, his devotion, and hard work. Primarily as a result of his service on the Courts Commission, many successful court improvements were a direct result of his persistence and his unparalleled ability to bring compromise and consensus to various divergent groups at a critical time in our history, all to the great benefit of our judicial and justice system. Justice David Britt, throughout his professional life, has set an extraordinary example for all attorneys, judges, and elected officials to follow, and he continues to be a North Carolina favorite son. Tonight, I am extremely proud to introduce to you the 2005 recipient of the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award, the Honorable David M. Britt. The Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court presents the Chief Justice's Professionalism Award to the Honorable David M. Britt for your dedication and commitment to the principles of professionalism in the legal community in North Carolina and the United States. It's signed, I'm proud to say, by me as Chief Justice. Let me show you that.
Judge Britt, congratulations on being selected as a recipient of the 2005 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. Your career has been an inspiration. You've spanned over 50 years, put you in important government positions at the top of the legislative branch as Speaker of the House, and near the top of the judicial branch as one of the first 6 judges on the Court of Appeals and a Justice of the State Supreme Court. Just to sort of start off, when did you first think that you might succeed as a legislator and maybe as an appellate judge?
I was first elected with very little opposition in 1958. And a good friend of mine from Wilmington was to be Speaker of the House at that time. And I knew that he would be very kind to me and try to help me all he could, and he did.
Well, now, you started out in Robeson County, in the little town of McDonald. Tell me about that.
Well, that's where I was born and raised. It's really a village, about 150 people. And Fairmont was the nearest larger town to it, 6 miles away. And that's where My father sold his tobacco where he did his banking, and when we went to town, it was usually the Fairmont.
Right.
So I became very, very much interested in that little town when I was growing up.
What was it about your early years with your family, if anything, that influenced your later careers in government service?
My father was a small merchant there in the village of McDonald, and he had a farm right in the edge of the village. And after I was born, just a year and a half later, another boy came along, and eventually there were 6 boys and 1 girl in the family, and I was the oldest. And he had a good idea about how to keep his boys out of mischief, and that was to keep them busy. So he would took a plot of land down there on the farm and would plant tobacco there for several years. And my brother next to me, a year and a half younger than I am, we would have to do all the work, except the plowing. We didn't have mules at home, and he would get one of the tenants to plow it. But just about everything else, we had to do it. Pull the suckers off the plants, pull off the tobacco stalks, pull the worms off of it, and just generally do the work. And I can show you that place now where I decided to be a lawyer.
I have such a place as well. Your family was very close in those days and still is very close. Your youngest brother is Earl Britt, United States District Court judge. Was there some common trait that contributed to you both rising so high in jurisprudential circles?
We were a right close family. My mother just, her whole life was devoted to making a home for a family and trying to give proper guidance to the family. And we had our chores. I was milking a cow when I was 8 years old, and my brother just next to me, just about a year and a half later, he took on the job of milking the cow in the afternoons, and I'd milk her in the morning. And that went on for 3 or 4 years. But we were just real close all the way.
You recall when you first decided to undertake a career in the law?
When I was a senior in high school, Professor J.L. Memory came to our high school and talked to the senior boys that were interested in going to college.
Yeah, he was a professor at Wake Forest.
Right. And he told us about the prominent alumni of the school and all of that sort of thing, and bragged on the law school and so forth. And I think he came as near talking me into it as anybody else did.
Well, we owe Professor Memory a vote of thanks. Aside from Professor Memory, were there mentors or persons of special influence in your life when you first started thinking about going into the law?
Not really. There are a lot of Brits in the county, and the kinship runs for generations. What I'm saying is they're generations removed from other generations. And there were 5 or 6 practicing lawyers in the county, and the name was well known with the legal profession in Robinson County.
Right.
And I figured that I could get a little bit of a start on their name, and I did. But I don't know, it just naturally evolved.
Now, you attended college and law school at Wake Forest.
Right.
Was Professor Memory the influence that caused you to go to Wake Forest, or were there other factors?
I was planning to go there at least to law school, but thought about going to one of the junior colleges as for the academic work. But he talked me into going to Wake Forest for the whole thing.
It's good to know. Wake Forest has been a big part of your life. You've given a great deal back to the university as a student, as an alumnus, and later even as a trustee of the university. A very high honor and a very responsible position. We've talked about how you decided to go, Professor Memory's influence. If you had to summarize for us what you took away from your Wake Forest education, what would you say?
Well, I was, after I told my dad his means were limited and it was in the Depression. And I told him if he would pay my expenses the first year, that I would do what work was available for money from the succeeding years. So he did, and I did. And the second year, I started waiting tables, even cleaning fraternity houses. And then I got into campus politics and became business manager of the college yearbook. And in my last year, I was business manager of the college newspaper.
Now, those salaried positions? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
They, it was not a salary as such. The business manager just got a percentage of the advertising. And
better than a salary.
well, a lot depending on what you did.
I understand.
Yeah. And it came pretty rough during my last year because I was in law school, hoping to take the bar in August. And I was out on the streets of Wake Forest and Raleigh and Durham selling advertising. And frankly, I just neglected my schoolwork. And it was pretty rough.
Pretty remarkable, though, even in those days.
But anyhow, I did well enough that my brother next to me was ready for college, and he came on there, and we were there together my last year and his first year. And I got him a job to start with, and we both worked mighty hard.
That's great. Now, Wake Forest is, you hold 3 degrees from Wake Forest, not just a bachelor's degree and a law degree.
I did not finish.
Oh, you didn't finish, so you have 2 degrees.
At that time, the rules of the state bar just required that the applicants for the bar had taken certain courses.
Right.
And it did not specify the degree. And the bar examination was given in August, I believe it was, 1937. And Joe Branch,
Former Chief Justice.
former Chief Justice, and we decided that we were going to go to summer school. And then the courses that we didn't take, we were going to monitor those, sit in on them, and take that bar examination. The professors told us not that it was the wrong thing to do, but we did it anyhow. And both of us passed the bar at that time. His family was a lot better shape than mine financially, so he went on back the next fall after he got his license and finished his work for his LLB degree. But I didn't go back because my job as business manager of the college newspaper, that was ended, and I just didn't have the means to go.
You went back to make a living.
That's what I was after at. So I went on back home and got a job in the store that fall.
So you didn't practice law right away.
No,
Why is that?
I didn't get my license until January.
And the reason was,
I passed the bar in August, but I wasn't 21 years old until January.
oh my.
And,
So you started at Wake Forest at 16.
right,
You finished your undergraduate work and got enough of your law school work to pass the bar before you were 21.
that's right.
Very remarkable. And then in '85, the university granted you an honorary degree.
I think that was the year.
Yes, sir.
I had served on the Board of Trustees after the school moved to Winston-Salem, and I finished an unexpired term of somebody, and then they granted me that honorary degree.
How did these honors and accolades from the university, the opportunity to be a trustee and an honorary degree, what kind of impression did they make on you?
Well, it made me that much more interested in the institution. And I went on, and after I got on the Court of Appeals, the president of Meredith College prevailed on me to be a trustee of that, and I did for 15 years. And that kept me from going back on the Wake Forest board.
I see. I see. Now, elective politics have played a big role in your life.
Well, it has.
You started out running for Recorder's Court Solicitor.
Right.
Was that right after you started practicing law or shortly after?
It was the first year, and I got whipped.
Can't imagine.
But 2 years later, I ran and was easily elected at that time.
You've been an inspirational advisor and mentor to many young lawyers, and some of us who are not so young, but we don't like to confess the lack of youth. Were there people who inspired you that became examples for you to emulate as you progressed through your career?
Oh yes, that more or less flowed naturally. There were several lawyers in the county that I didn't want to be anywhere near like them, but there were several lawyers in the county that I was impressed with, and they became my models.
Right. Care to call any names of those you chose to follow?
Mr. Dixon McLean was known as the gentleman of the Robeson County Bar, and a good lawyer with it. And his partner was Mr. Horace Stacy. They took an interest in me, and they became my mentors. They probably didn't know it at the time, but I looked up to them.
That's great. Now, your life changed in 1941.
Oh yeah. Got married that year, for one thing.
I think we're supposed to say that was the big thing, Joe.
That was the big thing.
Louise, your wife, married you in 1941, so you all have been married for 60 years, 63 years?
64 years.
64 years, wow. And your marriage was blessed with children?
Oh yes, I had 3 daughters to come along, and then finally a boy came along, but he got killed in 1972. He was almost 18 years old in an automobile wreck. But I have 3 daughters that I'm very devoted to.
You know, they're fine people, I'm sure. And one of them's married to a portrait painter that I happen to know, Mr. Green.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the second one voted to, it was married to Craig Green, an artist.
Now, with the competition of a busy law practice and being part-time solicitor and doing all these other things that you were doing in politics and civic life, and a wife and 3 or 4 children, how'd you balance all that together so that your children really had 2 parents instead of just one?
It was not easy, but of course I was home most of the evenings. I didn't get involved in so many things that took me away. I was very active in our church and in the Rotary Club, but beyond that I was not a joiner, and then on weekends I spent as much time as possible with the family. We had a habit of going out to my parents' home and my grandmother's home on Saturday afternoon. That was just as much a part of our routine as starting back to school on Monday. But we had a close relationship.
Well, now, were your parents and Louise's parents still living at that time?
My parents were,
Okay.
and Louise's father was. Her mother died when she was 19 years old.
Well, your active life as a Rotarian and your life as a Baptist lay leader is legend. How did you accomplish so much, not being a joiner, and how did this all come about?
Well, I was very interested in our church. We had a rather large church for the size of the town. We had, I reckon, 1,200 members of First Baptist Church. And when I joined the church, very soon after I opened my office in Fairmont, there were 4 small men's classes. And after about a year, the decision was made to combine them all the men over 25 years old, in one class. And I was asked to be the teacher. So I was not old enough to be a member of the class, but I became their what teacher they had. But I taught that class for 25 years and missed very few Sundays during that time.
That's amazing. Now, we've talked a little earlier about your going to the General Assembly in '58. You said you had a friend who was the Speaker of the House and got some help there. But you had an astronomical rise. You were there less than 5 full terms and were Speaker the 5th term. How did you do that?
Well, that was not unusual at the time. Most of the speakers attained the position after during their 5th term. That was true of my predecessor and 1 or 2 of others, and it was true of several that I served with. But I got the breaks during my 3rd term. I was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House, which was the biggest job in the House other than Speaker. And then when 37 came, 67 came around, it was just a natural thing, I suppose. And it was a right funny thing. I walked in the Sir Walter.
The hotel downtown.
Sir Walter downtown Raleigh, where most of the legislators lived. At the day before the '65 session started. And of course the speaker for '65 had already been agreed upon, you might say. He had not been elected. But as I walked in the lobby at the Sir Walter to get registered, and was standing in line, a representative from Columbus County came up to me and says, you want to be speaker next time? Talking about '67, and I told him I was certainly interested. He says, well, you got anything to write on? I told him I had a little book in my pocket. He said, well, put me down as the first person that committed himself to you.
Fun.
And he was a big talker. And he went on back, there was a bunch of fellas in there, and by the time I got through the line, I expect I had 10 or 12 names on that book. And within 3 days, I had every Democrat except one in the House committed to me for '67.
It's great.
That was fast race.
It was fast. But built on a great record. Now, you were there in, as the literary allusion goes, in the best of times and the worst of times. You were there for some really far-reaching legislation and some pretty unusual legislation. The speaker ban law came up on your watch, and the Intestate Succession Act was passed while you were there. You created a unified court system, and then finally passed the act that set up the Court of Appeals. We didn't have a Court of Appeals before '65.
It was right funny. In fact, to be honest, that's one of the reasons that I went to the legislature, was to help in the efforts to have a unified court system in North Carolina. We had 6 little district recorder's courts in Robeson County, and only one of them had a lawyer as judge. And I felt like that system could be improved on. And we had every county, just about in the state, had a different type of local court set up from what anybody else had. Some counties had district courts. Others had nothing but JP courts, inferior to the Superior Court. And others had what they called special courts. And it was just a hodgepodge. When somebody from Robeson County would go into another county and was passing through and would have a wreck or get caught, the first thing I had to do when I went up there to represent him was to find out what kind of court it was, and whether he was entitled to a jury trial or not. And I tried to find out something about the judge. But it was a hodgepodge if I've ever seen one. And right close to home, I mean close to Wake County, was over here in Harnett County. The Recorder's Court of Dunn had statewide jurisdiction. And they could, civilly speaking, could sue somebody in Asheville and make them come to Asheville down there and defend the suit. And there was nothing you could do about it.
Right.
And I had experience in that 2 or 3 times from Fairmont. And it was that's just a sample of what we had. But at the 6-1 session, the committee that was studying and working on the court matter introduced a bill that would amend the Constitution, subject to a vote of the people. Amend the Constitution to create a system of lower courts lower than the Superior Court, but uniform. And it also had in there authority for the legislature to create a intermediate court of appeals. But before the bill came up, members of the court quietly let the leaders know that they did not think we needed a court of appeals at that time, because just about everybody that went to the Supreme Court had to pay his own way. And therefore, there wasn't as much work as came just a few later when the United States Supreme Court held that everybody that might be imprisoned was entitled to a lawyer paid at local expense or state expense. And that's when the Supreme Court of North Carolina became just deluged with practice. But anyhow, we in the legislature we did not provide for a court of appeals in 1961, but the amendment passed, and then the next year, I believe it was, by the '63 session, the Supreme Court was beginning to get just overrun with litigation, and so they let it be known that we needed a court of appeals. So the 1961 session didn't do anything except recommend the appointment of a courts commission of some 15 people from all over the state to study the court setup and to make recommendations. And the speaker had so many to put on there, and so I was appointed to that commission and remained on it until sometime after I went on the Court of Appeals. But we would meet at least every other weekend. We'd get in Raleigh around 2 o'clock and put in an afternoon session, and then we'd go back into session Saturday morning and work all of Saturday morning and part of Saturday afternoon. That went on for 3 or 4 years, and working out the Court of Appeal, the district court system, which made every court, every local court of the same kind. And also, well, that was the big thing that we accomplished at that point. Well, then the next thing we worked on was to get another amendment passed in 1965 to create a Court of Appeals, because we had missed a chance in 1961 to have the authority granted. So we had to do that. I remember that Lindsey Warren and I, the Governor Moore had just been appointed or elected, and our commission wanted to go to work, and Lindsey was chairman of it, and I was more or less the official vice chairman, since he was in the Senate and I was in the House. And Governor Moore had the mumps and had to go to bed for about 2 or 3 weeks, and so we got Ms. Moore to let us go up and talk to him. And we went up there in the mansion and told him that we wanted to get to work on that amendment, but we knew first that he could help us a lot. First by even approving it, and then secondly by getting the word down through the Highway Commission and others of influence to vote on it. And he had been a Superior Court judge, and he knew what we were up against, and he gave us his blessings right quick. But he added one improvement to it. He said, let's get to work and have that referendum next fall. He said, we're going to have a referendum for a big highway improvements appropriation. And that'll have to be voted on by the people. And he says it's very popular. He says people are wanting that all over the state. Everybody's wanting new roads. And he said it'll help carry a little courts amendment. And sure enough, it was. The improvements amendment passed by 75% in the Courts Commission, or the Courts Amendment, to create the Court of Appeals by about 60 or 65%. So we had his full support on that, and enabled us to get it passed in 65, and then we had all of 66 to work on this Court of Appeals proposition, which we did and visited a number of other states and had representatives from other states come in and speak to our commission, and had very little trouble after we worked it all out, getting it through the legislature.
It's a fascinating story. Now, after having done all that work, the end of the 67 session, you stepped down as Speaker to become a judge.
Right. I frankly, didn't work for the Court of Appeals just to be a judge. But after we got into it, several people suggested that I be one of the original judges, since I had helped write the act and so forth. And I never did talk to Governor Moore. I mean, I never did go in to see him about it, because he had the power to appoint the first 6. And but several others, well, Joe Branch, for instance, had been Governor Moore's campaign manager and was in on the Supreme Court. And he told me, asked me, he said, don't you want to be one of those judges on the Court of Appeals? And I said, well, I would love to be, but I hesitate to politic for it. He says, well, I'll be your campaign manager.
Pretty good choice.
So it wasn't long before he let me know that I would be one of the appointees if I wanted to. So as you've indicated, I did resign as Speaker on the day before the 67 session adjourned because there are certain duties that a speaker has to, is responsible for during the interim
Yes, sir.
between sessions. And I resigned, and then the next day Governor Moore announced his 6 choices to be on the court. And Earl Vaughn was elected speaker to succeed me.
And just parenthetically, Earl came to the Court of Appeals not too long after that.
Well, he did a repeat performance. Governor Scott, who succeeded Governor Moore, was authorized by the legislation to appoint 3 more to it to make it a court of 9. And so Governor Scott appointed him to that one, and he had to resign as speaker just like I did.
Now, Judge, that's a lot of transition in your life. How did you cope with giving up being an advocate both in the political arena and in the law practice arena, and turn your life to deciding cases as a judge?
Well, during all that time, most of that time, certainly from 63 on through 67, I spent about as much time in Raleigh as I did in Robeson County. But my brother Earl had come in, and he was able to hold our practice together. We lost some practice as a result of my not being there, but he did a good job doing it, and that kept food on the table.
That's great. Now, when you left the political arena and went to the court and left the law practice, did you ever have sad, melancholy feelings?
Well, it did. In the first place, I took a reduction in income from practicing law to serving on the Court of Appeals. And then there were a lot of things that you could take off your income taxes by practicing law, travel expense and telephone expense and other things of that sort. And I couldn't do any of that on a judge's salary. But it was a struggle there for 2 or 3 years.
Well, you served with distinction. Now, you've served over your career with some outstanding lawyer leaders and indeed some judicial giants, Chief Justice Branch, Governor and Justice Dan Moore, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals Raymond Mallard, and many more that we don't have time to name. But are there any 1 or 2 people who most strongly influenced your growth as a lawyer and judge?
You said my growth as a lawyer. You mean as a judge?
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. On the Court of Appeals, Judge Frank Parker from Asheville was a real student and a hard worker. He would come down here from Asheville at least 1 weekend a month and spend the weekend here in Raleigh. He'd get up and go to church on Sunday morning, and just as soon as he ate lunch, he would go in that office and he would work like a Trojan until dark. And he was a real inspiration, and I'm telling you what, truth, he was a sound judge, and he was a beautiful writer. And I'll have to admit I mimicked him quite a bit. And he challenged the other judges to work hard.
Now,
And on the Supreme Court, of course, you already mentioned Joe Branch. Joe was, we were just about as close as brothers. And I suppose he had more influence on me than anybody else did.
now we've talked about lawyers and judges who had an influence on your wonderful career. Aside from your mom and dad, are there any non-lawyer personalities or friends that have had great influence on you?
When I first started practicing law in Fairmont, there was a pastor of the First Baptist Church that had been a layman auditor for the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad Company in Wilmington. And felt the call to preach. And he took his wife and 2 children and went to the seminary, to our seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And he and I became very close. And if I'd been tempted to kick up my heels anyhow, I would not have done it because of him. But he had a tremendous influence on my life.
That's great. You've been a mentor, whether you realize it or not, and I know you're so modest you don't confess these things often, but you've influenced and advised so many young people and people not so young over the years. I'm interested to know, is your advice different now than it was, say, 30 years ago?
Well, basically, it is not. It's basically 2 things, and that is to live right and to work hard. Those 2 things. But there's been such a change, and I think it's for the good. There's been some bad things about it, but overall it's been good, and that is a change of attitude towards people of other races. In Robeson County, we had not only the white race, but had the Indian race, and then the black race. And a lot of the Indian sharecroppers and black sharecroppers were exploited, and it just went against the grain with me. And I felt very, very kindly toward them. They were hard-working people, but they just didn't have any education. So many of them didn't. I remember when I was speaker, an Indian school teacher, a woman, came to my office one day and she said, you know, none of our no Indian has ever been a page in the legislature. And said, we have a brilliant young girl at a school that she taught at, and she wants to be a page. And wanted to know if you would appoint her. And I said, I certainly will. Be glad to. And I said, no, when y'all come up there, when you go to bring her up there, you bring her to my office. Don't carry her down there and just let her be in rank and file of the other pages. I said, you let me carry her into the pages room. And I did. And I told him, I said, everybody in there was white except her. I said, just about every one of you came from people of English heritage, and they were comers to this country, to America. Your ancestors came here from somewhere else, mostly from Europe. But I said, this young lady's ancestors were here hundreds of years before yours ever came. And I said, they are the original occupants of what is now America. And I said, this is a fine young lady, and I want you to, the rest of you, to be nice to her and help her any way that you can. I'm telling you what's true, that they almost worshipped her. It was almost a practice to whatever her name was, whatever she wanted to do, why the rest of them would go along with it. Of course, she wanted to succeed. That's what she wanted to do. She was a great influence for good on them, and I was very proud of her success. And thereafter, 3 or 4 would come up about every session. You know, it sort of broke the ice.
Now, Judge, you retired. It's hard to believe this, but you retired from the Supreme Court more than 20 years ago. I find that hard to believe, but I want to ask you to reflect over your 65-year career as lawyer, student, father, Rotarian, Baptist leader, judge, justice. I know you've done a lot of things that were absolutely right. Is there anything, if you had to do over again, you'd do differently?
Yeah, there are quite a number of things that I'd do differently. And one is I would have more respect for Indians and black people. I would look upon them as individuals rather than as a separate part of our population. I retired when I was 65 years old. I could have stayed on 7 more years. But I had worked night and day ever since I was big enough to work. 10 years old, and I just wanted to try to enjoy life a little bit for what days I had left. And that's the reason I retired at 65. I became associated with a law firm in Raleigh, and they let me do just what I wanted to do, and which wasn't much, but at least it kept me on track with the legal profession. And I enjoyed that for several years until I just completely retired.
Well, I've taken you too long, Justice, but I really appreciate your time. Congratulations again, Justice David Britt, on this most recent honor, the 2005 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. And thank you again for giving us the opportunity to talk to you on camera. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Judge Eagles. I've appreciated your friendship for many years, and I really appreciate your willing to take the time and effort and preparation to conduct this interview.
It was a high honor for me, Judge. It really was. Thank you very much.